Throughout Central America, from the Yucatan Peninsula to isolated plateaus, high in the Sierra Madre Range, there arose 4,000 years ago a civilization that flourished, excelled, then mysteriously disappeared. This was the ancient Maya, a culture that has astounded scholars and puzzled historians. Mayan achievements in art and architecture, in mathematics, language, and astrology were brilliant. Then, 1,000 years ago, they vanished, leaving only ruins to ponder and a lineage of proud, hard-working Indians to carry the name. Today in Guatemala, a Central American country about the size of Pennsylvania, more than half the population is pure Mayan. Most still live in the central highlands of the Sierra Madre Mountains and lead a rural life virtually unchanged for centuries. Their culture is unique, a rich heritage of Christian belief and Spanish folklore mixed with fragments of the ancient religion. And among their legends in Mayan scripture, the dreaded deity Cabracan proclaims, "I am the one who moves the earth." On February 4th, 1976, in the blackness of early morning, the earth did indeed begin to move. For 39 seconds it ruptured and broke. Just 39 seconds. And the worst natural disaster in the history of Central America had been recorded. Word reached the State Department in Washington just a half hour after the first shock. By 7:30, the Foreign Disaster Relief Center, operated by AID, the Agency for International Development, was in motion. For the next 21 days, around the clock, this center would be fully manned. Here, the entire United States relief effort would be coordinated. Here, resources from throughout the country and abroad would be matched to needs in Guatemala.
200 beds, sí, 200 camas cada uno.
In Guatemala, communications in almost all the central highland region had been knocked out. There was no way of knowing what had happened in the rural towns and villages. At the first light of dawn, volunteer pilots in private planes took off into the solitude of the Sierra Madres. The people waited and prayed. There was little else to do. Soon, official planes were launched to survey the rugged terrain beyond Guatemala City. Story by story, as these pilots returned, the picture came together. A picture of utter devastation, as far and as wide as these little planes could reach. Tecpan in ruins. Huayaba, a cloud of dust. San Martin Jilotepeque, destroyed. All access blocked by landslides. Chimaltenango, in ruins. That same morning, Kiel Laugerud Garcia, president of Guatemala, flew to many of the stricken villages himself. My countrymen, he said in his first broadcast, this is our most tragic hour. Our suffering is great, our dead are many, but we must begin today to bury our dead and to rebuild. The first relief came from inside Guatemala, from survivors who began at once to reach out to their neighbors. Food prepared in villages not severely hit soon appeared in villages that were. Local organizations took over distribution and broke out emergency stocks that had been supplied by AID, the UN, and other world organizations. people, stunned and patient, waited their turn. There was no panic, only their mutual need. This need, even then, was being broadcast to the world. By afternoon, the Foreign Disaster Relief Center at AID in Washington knew that Guatemala had suffered a major catastrophe, and the United States, like many other nations, had made a full commitment to help.
I have care on the other
Volunteer
line.
agencies were alerted. Stocks of food and medicine, pre-positioned in Panama for just such an emergency, were prepared for transport. Specialists in logistics, communications, and operations were pulled together into a task force at the center. At 6 o'clock that evening, minutes after a formal request for help was received from the Guatemalan government, the first U.S. plane left Panama, carrying food, medicine, and a 7-man disaster area survey team, a military team of communications, medical, and logistic experts. With their help, Guatemalan officials were quickly able to identify their most urgent needs and to lay plans to meet them. Within 24 hours, AID moved more than $500,000 worth of emergency supplies into Guatemala. Tents, plasma, water storage tanks, water pumps and generators, food and medicine, and professionals from many fields. Word from the highlands hourly continued to build a litany of ruin and desperation. And the message was always the same. Help is needed. Send help. Even as survivors began to dig their way out of the wreckage of their homes, doctors, nurses, food and clothing, temporary shelter, all were arriving from more than 24 countries, hundreds of organizations, thousands of people. On the third day, one U.S. newspaper reported, "What has begun is the fastest, most professional, most compassionate response to a natural disaster the world has ever seen." Hardest hit were the Mayan Indians in the Central Highlands, where more than 2/3 of the population of Guatemala live, the rural poor, those who could least afford to lose their homes and their possessions. Relief efforts were concentrated in these remote regions, and helicopters filled the skies, bringing help and hope. In the days that followed, hundreds of aftershocks brought new damage, new fears, new casualties. Churches and adobe homes, some only weakened in those first 39 seconds, tumbled into dust. Dust was everywhere. Dust and the quiet grief of the people. In the once lovely town of Chimaltenango, center of the quake, the people carried from their demolished church a life-size statue of Christ, reclining in a casket of glass. It had survived undamaged. "It is a miracle," one villager said. 8,000 of our town are dead. Those of us left must now thank God. Near a quiet mountain lake just outside Chimaltenango, the 47th Field Hospital of the U.S. Army was working around the clock. Mobilized by the Department of Defense with funds from AID, it had been airlifted from Fort Sill, Oklahoma, less than 72 hours after first reports of the earthquake were received. The 47th is a 100-bed, fully equipped hospital. Its assembly and shipment, a complex logistical effort, required 17 Air Force cargo planes, and pulling together a staff of more than 200 doctors, nurses, and medical specialists from half the states of the nation. "Most injuries are orthopedic in nature, broken bones," said Colonel Thomas Burke, commanding officer. "People were inside and asleep when the earthquake occurred and were hit by falling walls and heavy roofs. 4 more packaged hospitals were flown into areas where the need was greatest. One, in Antigua, was set up in the municipal stadium where the night before, a circus had played to laughing children. Its large tent, still up, was now being used as a hospital ward. Daniel Parker, AID administrator and the President's special coordinator for international disaster assistance, made a first-hand inspection of Guatemala and the relief effort underway. In his report to the President and the nation, Mr. Parker said, "It is awesome. The rural poor live in adobe houses with heavy tile roofs. Adobe looks substantial, but it isn't. It's heavy and it crumbles easily. Damage is widespread, covering an area of almost 4,000 square miles, affecting almost 20% of the population. 25,000 dead, 75,000 wounded, more than 1 million people homeless." Parker then asked for authorization to use a U-2 aircraft for a detailed reconnaissance of the area affected. Permission was also obtained from the government of Guatemala and other countries over which the plane would have to fly. The U-2 photographs proved invaluable. Roads and bridges most urgently in need of repair were quickly identified and located for the incoming U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, racing to beat the onset of the rainy season. The Guatemalan earthquake was triggered by the grinding together of 2 huge plates in the Earth's crust. These plates meet along a major fault which runs through the center of the country. Because of this fault, Guatemala is earthquake-prone. It had happened before. In time, it would happen again. The best protection for the Guatemalan Indians in the Central Highlands would be to move away. But even if there were a place for them to go, they have been part of these mountains for thousands of years. Their roots are deep, their heritage hallowed. They have faced the fact of their mortality and they were afraid. But they have survived, they will remain, and they will rebuild. The world is smaller now, and we are made aware daily of the problems of poverty and privation faced by more than half the people on Earth. But it sometimes takes a human tragedy to illustrate vividly just how wide the gap remains between them and most of us. This earthquake leveled towns and villages, but it also brought people together in common cause from around the world, and the people cared. On April 21st, 1976, Congress authorized $25 million to help Guatemala rebuild. Other millions have been offered by nations throughout the world. Much of this effort will be in the design and construction of stronger, lighter, and safer building materials for homes and public buildings. "We are on our feet," said Ambassador Asensio Wunderlich. "We'll put it back to what it was, only a little better." In a message to the world, President Laugerud Garcia gratefully thanked those many nations that sent aid, but proclaimed to his people that it is they who must rebuild their nation. "We are wounded," he said, "but we are not dead." Guatemalans are rebuilding, but they can never replace. Not the loved ones or the ancient buildings that had been so much a part of their lives. Nor will they ever forget. Not those shattering 39 seconds, or the compassionate response of neighbors throughout the world. But life must go on, and it is time to build anew.